Chapter 15. Of the things for which man, and especially princes, are praised or blamed. It remains now to be seen what are the methods and rules for a prince as regards his subjects and friends, and as I know that many have written of this, I fear that my writing about it may be deemed presumptuous, differing as I do, especially in this matter, from the opinions of others, but my intention being to write something of use to those who understand it. It appears to me more proper to go to the real truth of the matter than to its imagination. And many have imagined republics and principalities which have never been seen or known to exist in reality. For how we live is so far removed from how we ought to live, that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done will rather learn to bring about his own ruin than his preservation. A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good. Therefore it is necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain himself to learn how not to be good, and to use it and not to use it according to the necessity of the case, leaving on one side then those things which concern only an imaginary prince, and speaking of those that are real. I state that all men, when spoken of, and especially princes, who are placed at the greater height, are noted for some of those qualities which bring them either praise or blame. Thus one is considered liberal, another miserly, one a free giver, another rapacious, one cruel, another merciful, one a breaker of his word, another faithful, one effeminate and pusillanimous, another fierce and high-spirited, one humane, another proud, one lascivious, lascivious, another chaste and frank, another astute, one hard, another easy, one serious, another frivolous, one religious, another incredulous, and so on. I know that everyone will admit that it would be highly praiseworthy in a prince to possess all the above named qualities that are reputed good, but as they cannot all be possessed or observed, human conditions not permitting of it, it is necessary that he should be prudent enough to avoid the disgrace of those vices which would lose him the state, and guard himself against those which would not lose it him, if possible, but if not able to, he can indulge them with less scruple, and yet he must not mind incurring the disgrace of those vices, without which it would be difficult to save the state. For if one considers well, it will be found that some things which seem virtues would, if followed, lead to one's ruin, and some others which appear vices result, if followed, in one's greater security and well-being. Chapter 16. Of liberality and niggardliness. That's been stinginess. Chapter 16. Of liberality and niggardliness. Beginning now with the first qualities above named, I say that it would be well to be considered liberal. Nevertheless, liberality used in such a way that you are not feared will injure you, because if used virtuously and in the proper way, it will not be known, and you will not incur the disgrace of the contrary vice. But one who wishes to obtain the reputation of liberality among men must not omit every kind of sumptuous display, and to such an extent that a prince of this character will consume by such means all his resources, will be at last compelled, if he wishes to maintain his name for liberality, to impose heavy charges on his people, become an extortioner, and do everything possible to obtain money. This will make his subjects begin to hate him, and he will be little esteemed being poor, so that having by this liberality injured many and benefited but few, he will feel the first little disturbance and be endangered by every accident. If he recognizes this and wishes to change his system, he incurs at once the charge of niggardliness. A prince, therefore, not being able to exercise this virtue of liberality without risk if it is known, must not, if he is prudent, object to be called miserly. In course of time, he will be thought more liberal when it is seen that by his parsimony his revenue is sufficient, that he can defend himself against those who make war on him, and undertake enterprises without burdening his people, so that he is really liberal to all those from whom he does not take, who are infinite in number, one and niggardly to all to whom he does not give, who are few. In our times we have seen nothing great done except by those who have been esteemed niggardly. The others have all been ruined. Pope Julius II, although he had made use of a reputation for liberality in order to attain the papacy, did not seek to retain it afterwards, so that he might be able to make war on the King of France. And he carried on so many wars without imposing an extraordinary tax, because his extra expenses were covered by the parsimony he had so long practiced. The present King of Spain, if he had been thought liberal, would not have engaged in and won so many enterprises. For these reasons a prince must care little for the reputation of being a miser, if he wishes to avoid robbing his subjects, if he wishes to be able to defend himself, to not become poor and contemptible, and not to be forced to become rapacious. This vice of niggardliness is one of those vices which enable him to reign. If it is said that Caesar attained the empire through liberality, and that many others have reached the highest position through being liberal or being thought so, I would reply that you are either a prince already or else on the way to become one. In the first case, this liberality is harmful. In the second, it is certainly necessary to be considered liberal, and Caesar was one of those who wished to attain the mastery over Rome. But if after attaining it he had lived and had not moderated his expenses, he would have destroyed that empire. And should anyone reply that there have been many princes who have done great things with their armies, who have been thought extremely liberal, I would answer by saying that the prince may either spend his own wealth and that of his subjects, or the wealth of others. In the first case he must be sparing, but in the second he must not neglect to be very liberal. This liberality is very necessary to a prince who marches with his armies, and lives by plunder, sacking, and extorting, and is dealing with the wealth of others. For without it he would not be followed by his soldiers, and you may be very generous indeed, with what is not the property of yourself or your subjects, as were Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander, for expending the wealth of others will not diminish your reputation, but increase it. Only spending your own resources will injure you. There is nothing which destroys itself so much as liberality, for by using it you lose the power of using it, and become either poor and despicable, or to escape poverty, rapacious and hated. And of all things that a prince must guard against, the most important are being despicable or hated, and liberality will lead you to one or other of these conditions. It is therefore wiser to have the name of a miser, which produces disgrace without hatred, than to incur of necessity the name of being rapacious, which produces both disgrace and hatred. Chapter 17. Of cruelty and clemency, and whether it is better to be loved or feared. Proceeding to the other qualities before named, I say that every prince must desire to be considered merciful and not cruel. He must, however, take care not to misuse this mercifulness. Caesar Borgia was considered cruel, but his cruelty had settled the Romagna, united it, and brought it peace and confidence. If this is considered a benefit, it will be seen that he was really much more merciful than the Florentine people, who, to avoid the name of cruelty, allowed Pistoia to be destroyed. A prince, therefore, must not mind incurring the charge of cruelty for the purpose of keeping his subjects united and confident, for which a very few examples he will be more merciful than those who, from excess of tenderness, allow disorders to arise, from whence spring murders and rapine, for these as a rule injure the whole community, while the executions carried out by the prince injure only one individual. And of all princes it is impossible for a new prince to escape the name of cruel, new states being always full of dangers. Wherefore Virgil makes Dido excuse the inhumanity of her rule by it as being new, where she says, Res dura et reini novita sime talia conjunto, moliri et late fines custodi tuere. Nevertheless, he must be cautious in believing and acting, and must not inspire fear of his own accord, and must proceed in a temperate manner with prudence and humanity, so that too much confidence does not render him incautious, and too much diffidence does not render him intolerant. From this arises the question whether it is better to be loved more than feared, or feared more than loved. The reply is that one ought to be both feared and loved. But as it is difficult for the two to go together, it is much safer to be feared than loved, if one of the two has to be wanting, for it may be said of man in general that they are ungrateful, voluble, dissemblers, anxious to avoid danger, and covetous of gain. As long as you benefit them, they are entirely yours. They offer you their blood, their goods, their life, and their children, as I have before said, when the necessity is remote, but when it approaches, they revolt, and the prince who has relied solely on their words, without making other preparations, is ruined, for the friendship which is gained by purchase, and not through grandeur and nobility of spirits, is merited but is not secured, and at times is not to be had, and men have less scruple in offending one who makes himself loved than one who makes himself feared. For love is held by a chain of obligation, which, man being selfish, is broken whenever it serves their purpose. But fear is maintained by a dread of punishment, which never fails. Still, a prince should make himself feared in such a way that if he does not gain love, he at any rate avoids hatred. For fear and the absence of hatred may well go together, and will be always attained by one who abstains from interfering with the property of his citizens and subjects, or with their women, and when he is obliged to take the life of anyone, to do so when there is a proper justification and manifest reason for it. But above all, he must abstain from taking the property of others, for men forget more easily the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony. Then also a pretext for seizing property are never wanting, and one who begins to live by rapine will always find some reason for taking the goods of others, whereas causes for taking life are rarer and more quickly destroyed. But when the prince is with his army and has a large number of soldiers under his control, then it is extremely necessary that he should not mind being thought cruel, for without this reputation he could not keep an army united or disposed to any duty. Among the noteworthy actions of Hannibal is numbered this, that although he had an enormous army, composed of men of all nations and fighting in foreign countries, there never arose any dissension, either among them or against the prince, either in good fortune or in bad. This could not be due to anything but his inhumane cruelty, which together with his infinite other virtues made him always venerated and terrible in the sight of his soldiers, and without it his other virtues would not have suffered to produce that effect. Thoughtless writers admire on the one hand his actions, and on the other blame the principal cause of them, and that it is true that his other virtues would not have sufficed may be seen from the case of Scipio, very rare, not only in his own times, but in all times of which memory remains, whose armies rebelled against him in Spain, which arose from nothing but his excessive kindness, which allowed more license to the soldiers than was consonant with military discipline. He was approached with this in the Senate by Fabius Maximus, who called him a corrupter of the Roman militia. The Locre, having been destroyed by one of Scipio's officers, were not revenged by him, nor was the insolence of that officer punished, simply by reason of his easy nature. So much so that someone wishing to excuse him in the Senate said that there were many men who knew rather how not to err than how to correct the errors of others. This disposition would in time have tarnished the fame and glory of Scipio, had he persevered in it under the empire. But living under the rule of the Senate, this harmful quality was not only concealed, but became a glory to him. I conclude, therefore, with regard to being feared and loved, that men love at their own free will, that I conclude, therefore, that with regard to being feared and loved, that men love at their own free will, but fear at the will of the prince, and that a wise prince must rely on what is in his power and not on what is in the power of others, and he must only trouble himself to avoid incurring hatred, as has been explained.